my name's Luke Jackson. I've lived up in Newcastle for like 6, 8 years now, ever since I've been at uni. I came from a farm in Lincolnshire, just outside of Scunthorpe, and I haven't been to Southampton. I now work as a front-end developer at Bead Gaming, and I'm there trying to make some good casinos. Previously I worked for printing.com, which enhanced my obsession for layout. I've always been code-oriented, but I do have a sort of print side to me. And that helps, I think, when it comes to these kind of things. I'm here today mainly to give an introduction about Flexbox, recently adopted CSS layout model, which is getting quite a bit of attention recently. First I'm going to outline the problem space, kind of, and where we are with CSS and layout and how we got here. Secondly, I'll be looking at the specification and a bit of the sort of technical side of things, the theory. Then we'll probably take a break, and in the second half we'll start to look at more practical side of things and a few implementations of patterns and things I've found useful. Yeah, so let's get going. So first, as a disclaimer from me, I play around with CSS a lot in code pens and at work all the time. But I don't know everything about CSS, and I don't think I'd believe anyone who said they did know anything about CSS. As we all probably know, front-end developers, it's a bit of a dark art at times, and we don't quite know what's going on a lot of the time. I haven't pressed the next slide, there you go. This little quote by physicist Richard Feynman sort of sums up my experiences of Flexbox especially, and CSS properties in general. Imagine the gods are playing some great game, let's say a chess game, and you don't know the rules of the game, but you're allowed to look at the board from time to time, in a little corner perhaps, and from these observations you try and guess what the rules are. Flexbox especially, the amount of properties you've got, you are observing a certain state of things on this side, but a load of crazy stuff can be going on over there. I think this analogy will make sense soon. I thought that was quite a nice one though. This is what the internet has to say about CSS. It's not quite as elegant of a summary, I don't think, but were some interesting insights all the same, so we'll just have a little look through them. Yep, meant to press that button, still getting the hang of this one. Got a little dodgy connection there. Yep. This is nothing to do with Flexbox, by the way, this problem. We're good? Good. One does not simply know hell until they've tried web development with CSS. I think that's a slight exaggeration. They've obviously never tried submitting an app to the App Store. What else have we got here? Let's make things pretty with CSS. SpongeBob up there. Yes, let's do that. I think that's quite important. Removed 1,000 lines of CSS, but site doesn't change. That's like quite a common problem, right? And it's staggeringly easy to do these days. Yeah, it's sort of part of a bigger front-end problem we're not going to look at here. We've got buzz here, CSS hacks everywhere. It's an unfortunate truth, I guess, but we do use a lot of hacks. It's not like other languages that everything's sort of laid out for us. We sort of have to work around stuff for some reason. And let's import all the things. That was a .NET developer did that, I think. All right, so what's the real problem if we've looked through a few funny things? Where are we, I guess? Well, it nearly comes back to that penultimate point, or at least Flexbox does. It's just CSS hacks everywhere. Most of us have probably heard or used float left before. Hands up who hasn't. Yep, good. Passed that test. But yeah, as you might know, if you've used float, it sends things sort of left or right, and things stack up until they hit the end and then go on. But as you might also know, is that any floated elements inside a container, the height of those elements is completely ignored by the container. Does anyone know why this is? No, neither do I. I think it's because CSS reasons. That's what I have heard, is that they are the reasons. But I guess, of course, we're clever little computer scientists, and you might be able to answer this one. Can anyone tell me how we fix this problem? Yeah, half right. We didn't fix the problem, we just hacked around it. And that was with a clear fix, yeah. Which looks like... Glamorous assistant, yeah. Which is this lovely bit of code. This is our first hack, I guess, we're going to look at, and one that Flexbox aims to eradicate entirely. There are a lot of other hacks, CSS hacks that we use, but I can't remember this off the top of my head, so I don't expect sort of anyone else to. And it'd be nice if we could slowly phase these things out. I'm not picking on floats here. They do have their uses. Wrapping text around an image would be a good one, something Flexbox definitely can't do. But they do fall short when it comes to layout, at least with capabilities. They're very limited. And Flexbox is by far their biggest rival. So what does layout look like without floats? Looks like this. It's pretty beautiful, isn't it? This is an introduction to Flexbox straight from the Mozilla Developer Network site. What I'm going to do is go through a few of the sort of highlights, I guess, of this paragraph and see if it's something that would maybe help us, see if there's anything juicy in here. So what we got first? So first is a layout mode. We've all hopefully heard of layout modes. Usually you just use two, and that's display block and display table. Display block then sends things downwards. Display inline or inline block sends things that way, which is all right. We've worked with that so far, and you can also get some of that with floats. But we're predominantly worried about the arrangements of elements, which is straight to the point, I guess. Next is they will behave predictably, which is something we don't really get in CSS all the time, I guess. We've all noticed the inconsistencies. I guess more consistency means less hacks, less guesswork for us, means more consistent interfaces for the user. Accommodate different screen sizes. That's got to be good, right? And this is an increasingly big problem in CSS and HTML front end in general, is that we have to accommodate for all kinds of screen sizes now. Not just small, medium, and large, but every single size in between, every height, width. As soon as someone brings out a new phone, you've suddenly got a new screen to design for. It does not use float. So straight off the bat, we're sort of eliminating those. Many designers will find Flexbox models easier to use. I think that's an insanely patronizing line there by Mozilla. Even designers will find it easier to use, which is great, but sweet all the same. Any direction, we're down here now. Do I have a pointer on here? This is pointable. The red one? Oh, yeah. Ooh. Any direction. So direction is something we haven't really had in CSS. You can't, I guess we've had left and right before, but not really go that way or go this way. So that could be useful, I guess, coming into these kind of things. Flexible dimensions. I'd say this is nothing really too groundbreaking. To be fair, we've had flexible dimensions. You've got percentage widths, EMs, REMs. There's loads of different kinds of ways of sizing things. Flexbox does help, as you'll find out in a bit, that it uses intrinsic widths and content-driven widths, proportional units as well. These are all useful things, but we will get onto that in a minute. Positioning child elements. Now this is pretty powerful. Doesn't sound much right about now, but it's quite a unique trait, and again we'll go on to see why this is so unique. Complex layouts, I guess the Holy Grail layout isn't really cutting it anymore. We're slowly seeing more and more crazy layouts, and we'd like to do those without loads of markup, I guess. Flexbox is going to help us with this, which leads on to simpler and cleaner code, I guess. A little statement that every developer should be happy to see. Last but not least, order. Not as in law and order, we're not clamping down on things, but as in 1, 2, 3, we can now independently change the visual order of things on the page from their source order, which is quite nice. So if everyone's following so far, I don't think it's very crazy. At the moment, I've just read you a spec. So we shall move on. Now, I know a lot of people have their doubts about Flexbox and its capabilities and whether it should be sort of used in production. So I'd like to point out that most of the layouts we're going to look at or we will see can be achieved using floats, inline, block, everything like that. So go ahead, build it like that, but then see if you can identify where Flexbox can be used as progressive enhancement. I guess this is just a disclaimer really, I don't do this, I just throw Flexbox at everything, but if you want to be safe, this is the way to do it. Yeah, if you don't need it, then sweet, but if you come to me with bloated markup and hacky CSS to try getting a certain layout, then don't expect me to ship it. Before you ask, something probably on everyone's mind, browser support is pretty good. If you're developing for normal browsers, they're not normal. Always use a prefixer, be safe, why not? Because a lot of these, I know, yeah, especially IE, and even, yeah, quite a lot of the others do still require prefixing, but will work consistently. I don't know if you can see that up there, but that says 95%, which is pretty good, right? You're almost safer on mobile than you are on desktop now with Flexbox. I guess it's only IE letting desktop down, really. And you can always use Modernizer to determine Flexbox support and sort of add and remove the classes as you will and fall back to floats. So, we're going to get into the real stuff now, I guess. Oh, I forgot to put animations on this, but I was meant to hide these out. But basically, we often know what layouts we want to achieve. We've seen them either in print, usually, or we've seen them on a fancy website of someone that's really pushing the boundaries. The problem is we often lack the vocabulary to describe these behaviors and to achieve the layouts we want. So we'd start to think of a Flexbox as a language, I guess, a set of nouns and verbs at least that can describe our intent to the computer to say what we want to happen when things get flexy, I guess. So our first step toward this goal is to break things down into two components. And if you don't understand these two components, you won't understand Flexbox. So concentrate now, I guess. It's pretty abstract, but I think you guys can keep up. Now, I'm going to click and pretend that containers just appeared. So a Flexbox layout constitutes of parent containers, referred to as flex containers, and its immediate children, which are flex items. Flex container, flex items. I like to sort of boil that down to a container is a thing with things in it, and an item is a thing in a thing. It really is as simple as that. Don't blow your mind. So let's look at these two things in a bit more detail. Right, I don't know if the text is a bit small on here, but this is a container. It's the outermost element, I guess. It's not very tough to comprehend. This is any element with a CSS property display effects. So that's how you kick everything off. Now this one property here is a lot more powerful than it looks. It's kind of the CSS property to rule all CSS properties. It implies a lot of mayhem is about to ensue, I guess, as we'll find out, because the default properties here, we've got a few here and a few here. Most people's qualms with Flexbox is that there are loads of properties. You don't need to use them all, but I do think it's important that we know the defaults. So we're going to go through a few of these defaults here. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we'll start overwriting ourselves later. But let's go here, give you a brief overview. Flex direction, row. This is really not too complicated. Row, as you might all have guessed, is that way. You can also have row reverse, which is that way. And you can have columns and column reverse as well. I'd say the reverses are a little over the top. I haven't found a use for it yet. But row and column, very important. When you declare that something has a row or a column, it infers or it sets an axis on your document or in that container. So given this container with display flex and flex direction row, we create two axes are created. They're not actually created, but they're mentally created, right? The main axis is in the direction of the flex direction. So in this case, the default is row. Your main axis is horizontal like this. And another axis sort of naturally is perpendicular to that, and that's called the cross axis. Main axis, cross axis. If you had a column, this would be the main axis. That would be the cross axis. That's probably the most important default here, but we'll go on to look at the others as well. Flex wrap, no wrap and wrap. That's just two values, quite easy to comprehend. When things hit the end, they either keep going, or when things hit the end, they go back to the beginning on the next line. Yeah, this is not dissimilar to typical float behavior that you've seen before. Now these two here can be condensed into this one rule. We can take that off and just say flex no wrap. So these two are set by default, and that implies this default also. So contents of the container can be positioned and aligned using the following properties. Align items stretch. That's saying that items on the main here should all stretch to fill the cross axis. That might seem a bit crazy right now, but that's what happens. Align content stretch. That's when there's multiple lines of items, and you're going to do the same thing. Again, these will become a lot clearer later. These are a bit easier to understand. Justify content. Justify content is if you've got something here in the top corner, if you justify content, it will push it across in the main axis, or left or right in this axis. Align items is in this axis. Justify is in the main axis. Again, a lot to take in, but just bear with it, I guess. We'll move on to items. So, as we said, it's a thing in a thing. Any item that is the direct descendant of a flex container, so anything that is direct descendant of something with display flex, it inherits the shorthand property this. Again, this is quite a powerful property just to spring on you as a default, because it does do a lot of crazy stuff. But basically, this is shorthand for these defaults here. These defaults are flex grow, quite intuitive, I guess, really. Can the item grow? And if it does grow, by how much can it grow? Oh, Jesus, that's 20 minutes up. Okay. Yeah, by how much can it grow? And if flex shrink, on the other hand, is if it can shrink, I mean, can it shrink? Yeah, and if so, how much by? Flex basis is basically the width of the item before any resizing or squishing or flexing is applied. All right, so if something's 100 pixels as flex basis, it starts at 100 pixels, but if it's got some extra space and it's allowed to grow, it will take up that space. If there's not enough space for 100 pixels and it's got shrink, it will be allowed to shrink. And then order, which is again to do with the source order of things on the page, or the visual order of things on the page according to the source. If you put something as everything defaults to order 0, which means it'll be in its normal source order. If you put order 1 on something, it will put it at the end of all the order zeros. If you put -1 on it, it will put it before all the zeros. Again, easier to show in practice than it is here. Now, although a container generally controls the alignment of items inside it, items can also align themselves. So you've got align self and auto. Auto defaults to whatever its parent's told to do, which defaults to stretch. And also you can use margins. Margins aren't really part of the Flex. Margins we've had forever, but they act quite funny in the Flex world. So we'll go on to have a look at those a little bit later. The viewport, I guess this is where your containers live. It's not really part of Flex. But you put items in the viewport, and we can think of the viewport as one big Flex container with possible axes that way, cross-axis that way and that way. There's nothing much you can do about the size of the viewport nowadays, as we've discussed. You just got to deal with it, suck it up. Things have to fit in the viewport. It's probably important to note that X is very important in a left to right context. This length here is probably the most important length in any viewport, because this is usually binding, and usually we scroll this way. So this is really a hard edge. These two edges are obviously quite important, but this one is as well. The y-axis is less important, as it's the direction we tend to scroll in, so we usually take it for granted. We can either have a lot of it or we can have none of it. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. Interestingly, both column layouts and row-wrapped layouts will all overflow out the bottom anyway. So probably it's common knowledge, but interesting to point out, I think. You can only have too much space if you have a max width on an item. Items should probably take up as much space as they can, whatever it is. They should fill the space there to make the most of it. But if we don't, we can't have too little space, we can only have too much. Flex items, yeah, given the opportunity, will take up all space they can get, and if they don't have enough content, they can end up with lonely looking layouts. So remember to set important min and max widths on your content or on your items here. So I said I was going to go into a little bit of browser stuff here now, because I think I've spewed enough theory at you, and it's pretty hard to take in, I think. Right, so I'm aware that we did just go through 20 minutes of theory there, and I don't think I don't like it as much as you do, but I do think it is important to know, especially the defaults. If you want to go back and check those again, sort of after the talk, I'd highly recommend you do that. They aren't very clearly documented anywhere, the defaults, and they do have a big impact on the layouts they'll be making. So we're going to start this one. Content is like water. It's one of the fundamental principles of responsive web design. Things should just fit. They should take up as much space as they can. And we should optimize the user experience regardless of device or viewport size. Yeah, you put water into a cup, it becomes a cup. You put water into an iPhone, it becomes an iPhone. So here we can see all different shapes and sizes of container, but they've all got similar stuff in, some brown mucky water by the looks of things. But I think the important thing is they've all got a calculable area, and once we've got a calculable area, either a width and a height, then we can try work out how best to fill that area, right? Flexbox is going to help us to do this by by determining whether content should grow into a certain space or shrink to prevent overflowing of a boundary. So I'm going to go through just quickly. These are sort of components that I've made in my head that I've found really useful ways of combining certain Flexbox rules to get certain behaviors. They're really not very complicated again, just probably something that should have been done normally. The first one I'm going to start easy is a column. Column, I've literally made in my CSS, I have a column tag now that I make, especially for prototyping. Inside my column tag, things go down. I know they're going to go down. I can guarantee they will only go down. Things will never sit side by side. When you flex items in a column, it affects their height. This has got me for ages because I've always assumed flex takes up some width. But when you're in a column, flex takes up height. When you align items with using the align properties, it affects their left and right margins. Yeah, their left and right margins. We align things to the center of the column here. That's alignment when you're in a column. If you want a column to wrap, which I recommend against, sort of first pro tip of Flexbox, they need a height. Because a column without a height will see no need to wrap because it thinks it can carry on going down forever. It's not a problem. I'm aware that we went slow on the last half, so I'm going to go through this. If you've got any questions, just rack them up. That's what columns would look like. You'd start here, you'd get to the bottom, it would come back to here, you get to the bottom, come back to here, get to the bottom. It's quite a weird pattern, something we don't really see in UI or print really. And there's other ways of achieving this layout without the complexities of wrapping columns. The next, quite obviously, is a row. Now this is a big one, I guess. It's still not the most commonly used one, but again, I've created my own row tag that I tend to use. So I have a row. When I put something in a row, I expect these following behaviors. When you flex something on a row, it affects the width. So you always, when you flex something, it's always affecting the main direction, or the main axis, which in this case is this. The cross axis is the dotted one. In sort of opposite to the column again, items on a row will flex in the X and stretch in the Y direction. I was going to draw a lot of this stuff out on the blackboard, but I think we're just going to go straight to browser now instead. It'll be a lot easier to see. By default, in a row, things are going to keep going that way regardless. But if they hit the end, by default, they're going to shrink to try keep themselves on that row. It's another gotcha that will become apparent when you're trying to do this stuff. If a row is going to overflow, then it's going to have to be hidden, or it's going to have to scroll. They are literally your only options. A row will try expand vertically to accommodate its tallest children, as well as horizontally. Horizontally might seem obvious, but unlike floats, it's going to actually expand. Which brings me on to rows, which might seem obvious again. Unlike a row, when stuff hits the end of a row, it's going to go to there, and it's going to go to there, which is nearly exactly the same as floats, but without the bugs. You're not going to get items hooking on each other, as you might have seen with floats. If you've got an item this tall, and then this tall, and then here, and then you wrap, your float's going to stop here on this little hook, or even here. This doesn't happen. Rows are, again, the height of a row is determined by its tallest item, and the other one's going to clearly go on to the next row. I guess a little beware here is that even number of equally sized items distributed over multiple rows is going to create the appearance of columns. So if I say 100 pixel squares are going here, 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 then it's going to wrap to here, 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 here. You're going to end up with columns of items, which is kind of what we've been doing wrong with, or I feel we've been bit misleading people when we put col4 or col6. It's not really a column. It'll create the appearance of column when it starts to wrap, but really they're just items in rows. So it shouldn't be too hard to start imagining now columns and rows in websites today. This is a pretty typical layout that you will see on a day-to-day basis. Effectively, you've got some kind of navigation across the top, I guess, which will always be a row. Generally, you don't want those to break onto another line. Usually, you would hide items if they're going to overflow, or you can scroll. Usually, you've got a sidebar with some content in it, usually links or something, which are always going to be a column. Again, it's pretty obvious, but you can guarantee it's going to be a column if you use flex direction column. And then in your main content, you've got varying bits, like you might have a chunk here or a chunk here, and then it drops onto the next line to be a big full screen chunk. I guess with Flex, we can really be very explicit about these behaviors that we want to see from our layout. It is important to think of the implications of the properties we're about to use. And I think there's only two things you can do with layout, and that is arrangement and sizing. So Flex is going to help us arrange things on the page, and it's going to help us size things to fit. Two very distinct sort of uses, I guess, or advantages that we're getting, and we get them for free. An interesting point is you can nearly switch these off. There's the Flex property, you can do Flex none, and that will make all of these invalid effectively, which means you're then dealing with static width items, just like floats or something like that. And you can take advantage of all of these without the blag of all of these, which is quite nice and something I didn't realize until a bit later on. The reason these two are in the middle is only because, as you'll see, when we flex items and they have align item stretch on them, stretch affects the cross-axis and thus the height or width of an element, and therefore slightly creeps into sizing and not just arrangement, because it seems like it's affecting the size of the items. Usually it's quite non-destructive though. But again, I'm nearly tired of talking off of slides, so I'm going to try and live code this a little bit and show you some use cases. I do have some demos, like pre-prepared. I'm just going to show you. Oh, I've sat on the thing. But I'm going to show you here everything we've learned up till now and show you that it's not brutally complicated and you don't need to use a ridiculous amount of properties to achieve the behaviors you probably want to see. Right, so in here, as you can see, if everyone can see that, yeah? It's a disgusting color scheme, but apparently it's better when it's on screen. So I can really start that again. We have a UL. No, we don't. We'll not start that again. We'll just put that back to there. We have a UL with 3 LIs in it that have varying content, right? This is a really dumbed down version of a site, but this is what we've got. Now, the properties I've put on this, although you can see all these are commented out, so they're having no effect. So on my UL, I've got display flex, which turns it into a flex container, right? That's this gray area here, if you can see, just behind these elements. It's this dark gray area. All I've got on it is display flex. All I've got on the LIs at this point is padding 1 REM and the text color. Down here, I've just styled each one so we can differentiate the children from each other on the row. Now, by default, as we saw in the first slide, I don't know if you remember, but items are told that their flex basis is auto, which is the initial width of it. And you can see here, we've not set any widths, but nothing's overflowing, so all the items here have sort of inherited their natural width, their content-driven width, their intrinsic width, if you will. They were told that they can't grow by default. That's just default Flex behavior. They're not growing. They've got some extra space here you got the extra space here. Then they're not bothered. They'll just sit there with their intrinsic width. But they were told that they can shrink. As you can see, they're going to shrink, all right? This might not seem groundbreaking, but at least we've got the defaults out of the way, right? We've got an intrinsic width of auto. We can't grow, we can shrink. So what else can we do from this point? I think this is a good starting point. But what more can we bring in? The next one we looked at was flex direction and flex wrap, which got combined into flex flow. I don't use flex direction and flex wrap very often now. I prefer to be a bit more explicit and write flex flow, row, wrap, because then at least I know what's going on and I don't have to remember the default. Can anyone guess what this is going to do? What's going to happen to the boxes when I squish this? They'll stack. Yeah. So let's see. Oh, it knew. So even though we've got flex shrink on, it's gonna sort of abide by the wrapping rule over that, which is just something you have to know, I guess. So you can see we've got this wrapping behavior. Now this is pretty much floats, right? This is float left. I guess the interesting thing about this is we didn't have to tell the children to do anything. We've just told the parent, any children that are inside of you, wrap them, right? So the LI has got no float left on it or anything like that. And again, that's quite the powerful property of Flex, is that it has such control over its children. It's also why you can get into trouble sometimes with it. But again, the behavior we're seeing is quite expected. Everyone knew that. So what else have we got? We said we got justify content. Now, justifying content I like to think of as, you know, when you're on a text editor and you've got text align left, middle, and right, or when we're in a row like that, that's all that is. But instead of left, middle, and right, because we're sort of omnidirectional, we can't use left and right because when you're going downwards, left and right's actually top and bottom. So we have center, which I like because center is the same whatever direction we're going in. So when we justify content center, we can see we've taken all the content inside the container, and whatever it happened to be or whatever size it happened to be, we shifted it into the center, right, along the main axis. We're in a row, so the main axis is that way. You can see it's taken up, so it's distributing space around, and when we've wrapped, the items that drop go into the center. Now this is this impossible with floats, that behavior? I can't see that happening with floats ever. So we're already sort of at an advantage there if this is the kind of behavior you want. There's a use for it. Don't use it all the time. I've just seen it on the Slides website, slides.com or whatever, and we noticed they're using Flexbox because we've seen this behavior. Could maybe, yeah. I don't know if you would have to have a full width blue box there. And then text is centered inside the full width blue box. Still. It was 2 lines of code we've written, oh no, 3 lines, sorry, we've written here, but we didn't actually need to write these ones, because they're defaults. But center's nice. And then if we wanted to move it to the left, instead of left, text align left as we would usually put, we put flex start. All right, and similarly, end. And what that's saying, start and end, really means the start of the flex direction that we're going in, or the end of it, of the main axis, sorry. So I like to imagine that I'm actually a bit sideways, and I'm driving down that road and I'm going to the end of the road or the front of it. And same as if I'm going a column, I'm going that way, which is quite good. You can also do other bit crazy stuff with that. Justify content space around, which is a weird one. It's basically put automatic margins on either side, saying if there is any free space, distribute it evenly around yourselves, which is pretty good. There's another one, space between. So the end two items now don't get any margin around it, which you probably come across as a point in time where you're trying to make a menu where you want an icon in the middle and then two things either side. Well, this is kind of a perfect time to do that. Obviously beware that when we're wrapping with space around, you're going to get this behavior, which is exceptionally weird and probably not what you wanted. So it's probably best to put no wrap on that to the point where it's going to do that. All right. So as you can see, there's already a lot of combinations. With a lot of properties, you're going to get a lot of combinations. And there's no way I'm going to cover all the combinations here, but I'm going to try to point out some of the useful ones. All right, what else have we got? So we've done those three. I'm going to leave those three on. I'm probably going to put this back to center because I like center. It's easier to understand. Right, align items center. Did nothing. Now, I guess a little pop quiz would be, sorry if I touch that again, would be, why is that not doing anything? Well, align items takes the main row, the main axis, which is a row, and any items that have variable height, it will center those heights. Maybe this is a good time for this. Given the main axis, if you've got items like this, this, and this, you can see they're centered that way, along that axis. So that's what align item centers does. And the reason we're not seeing anything happen here is because they're all the same height. So there's no issue here. I might be able to squeeze a little bit of height out of one of them if I fill this with a load of rubbish. And pull it like that. We've still got wrap on. I'm going to turn no wrap. So now we've got this here. But you can see there, those boxes there, you can see they're all aligned in the center. Quite hard to see. Quite hard to sort of come up with that with just text, but that's what align item center is doing. Another way to sort of expose the use of that is to put a min height on our container. And now you've got vertical centering completely for free, right? So it doesn't just align the items in line with each other, but if the container's got a height and they're not touching the top and the bottom, it will put them into the middle as well. It's a bit crazy, right? I'll leave that height on there because it's easier to show these here. Let's just, I'm just going to put a width 100 on that, just to show you that they are actually fully centered within the container and then fully aligned center on the main axis of each other. Now this is good, but when we break at some point, we're going to put wrapping back on. For this last one here, align content center, we have to allow wrapping. Align content center, as you will see, you can see we've got align item center there. It's taking precedence, it's good, we're all in the middle. And then we've got wrap on and we get smaller. Oops. What's happened there? Well, it turns out that align items only works when you've got one row. If you've got two rows, like overflowing or wrapping, it's completely ignored. Which is a little bit weird, but it kind of makes sense eventually. So what we can do is align content center, which takes all of the content and slams it into the middle. So we've got one row and then that. Align content defaults to stretch. Oops. Does it now? All right, it's doing space between at the moment. I don't quite know why it's not doing stretch. Oh, there we go. So this is saying when there are multiple lines in this container, I want each line to take up as much space as it can. That makes sense. So now they're all in a row, they're all taking up full space. When they're like that, they'll take up half. Like that, they'll take up a third. You can see we've got 3 rows, and each row is stretching to take up equal amount of space, of the empty space available. Now we've got 1 row, and each item's taking up as much space as it can. So a lot of combinations, and a lot to go through. This is all well and good, I guess, when you have 3 blue, green, and red boxes full of a little bit of text, but I hear some of you going, yeah, but how is this useful in real life? It is. So I'm going to go on to explain those a little bit, or we're going to go along to have a look and see sort of how these can be useful. First of all, is there any questions about that? Because I understand that is what you've seen probably seems, quite simple, but some of you are probably going, how was that happening? If not, that's good. I think that's a success. Either that or you don't know enough to answer any questions, or ask any questions, and that's my bad. I'm going to pop to this demo now. Now I've got a few demos. I think probably the one I'm going to start with is this one. It's one I've done quite recently. Now you've all probably seen this page on the internet before. It's a little one. But this was a little project, so I started making what I've called Flexi CSS, and it's just a thing built on top of Eric Meyer's reset to sort of start accounting for flexible things. Now we can break this down. I wanted to test it at one point, and this was my test for it to see what happened. And I would show you the real Google homepage, but this is exactly the same. So we can break this down, or I broke this down in my head, into structure and content for a start, which is quite a nice way to do Flex before you drive yourself crazy. The structure definition's down here, and I'll sort of go through it on here. This might look crazy markup, by the way, but it's all valid. As far as I'm aware, you're allowed to do this. But structure definition, we have a container. The whole container is this screen here. All right? Inside it, we've got an X, which I used to call row, but I got tired of typing 3 characters and decided I'd type 1 instead. So at the top here, we've got an X, right? This X up here is always an X. Luckily, it's got few enough items on it that it never has to be anything but an X, right? When you get to 320, which is what I designed down to, we've still got plenty of space there for all those items. So that's fine, that's just a row. And inside that row, we've got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, cool. I've got an extra one there. But that is literally it. I know by looking at this is 5 items in that direction. Not a problem. Now under that, we've got this area here. Now this area I put as a column. So we're in the Y direction, right? We're going down. And inside that we've got 3 items. 1, 2, and then 3, which contains 2. What I've done here on this is said,
Actually, I'll go on to the third one. The third one is exactly the same as the top one, but at the bottom, and we've got this weird split in the middle that we're going to have to sort of accommodate for. X at the top, display flex, flex direction row, no wrap, or flex flow row, no wrap, and then justify content to the end of the row. Easy as, the simplest one you can do. I've also put align item center. So you notice this bit's a little bit bigger than this, and usually when you float things you have to piss about with margin top, 2 pixels, to try and get everything to sit in line. This you put align item center and it's going to center them all regardless. Absolute centering as well. Simple, done the top bit, right? This bit, the Y. So what's unique about the Y? Well, the Y is taking up any extra space that isn't this bit or this bit. And to do that, because our container here, I've set as a column, just like I usually put display block on, everyone puts display block on sort of body items. So because the container is a column, I can say flex 1, which means take up any available space that you find. And if no other item on that page is trying to take up available space, it will take it all. So sweet. It knew that this bit was being taken up, it knew that this space was being taken up, and it knew the height of the screen. So it went and took all of that and just left this at the bottom, nicely at the bottom. I'll try to take that off actually, because it's probably a good one to notice the difference of. I'm sure it's here somewhere. No? I can't find the items. Alright, I won't take it off. But yeah, Flex 1 is on there. I don't quite know where my styles are in there. I haven't looked at it for a while. Maybe it was on the Y. No. Either way, if I took Flex 1 off of this, basically this would pull up to here. This would be only as high as it needs. And this bottom bar here would sit below it. We'd just go 1, 2, and then 3. But because we put Flex on here, we instantly stretched out, took up all the space. No big deal, I guess, but really easy to do. We'd never had to set a height. We never had to say, this. I expect this to be 600 pixels. It's just like, use as much as it can. The items inside of it, there were 3 items inside of this Y here. And I've said, well, your Y is as tall as it can be, so I'd like to justify content in the middle. All 3 items need to be in the middle, and I want to align the items in the center. You'll see on the real markup, this last one here, you might notice there's 2 sat together there. So really, all I did there was change those to X's. So now I'm in the X direction. I know that's gone an item, image, search bar, and then an X with 2 items in it. Yeah? I don't think tidy works with HTML and JavaScript pane. But now we can see that. We've got a Y with an item, and then an X with 2 items in it. Again, just from this markup, we can completely guarantee what that's going to look like, except for the alignment. But the structures, item, row. And then the bottom, we have an X with 7 items in it. Now this one's an interesting one. Up here we used justify content flex end, right, to move all of the items up to that end. This one down here we got some weird split. Now what we could do is wrap these lot in a div and wrap these lot in a div and then say space between. And then it will put this space in between. It'll push that to that edge, and it'll put that to that edge. But what I prefer here is crazy margins. Now I'm going to inspect the elements, so I actually have to find the style. But you can see here I've got this item terms here, and this was just because it was like this on the site. Terms broke at that point. What have I put there? Margin left auto. What margin left auto did was take up all the available space, but with its margin. So I've used no align items or justifying content there. I've just said, have your left margin take up as much space as possible. Therefore, when we shrink it, there's less space available, we'll just take less up until they all come to meet nearly at the beginning. Now, I haven't gone into margins, and it's probably a good time to do so, or it might be shown in a later thing. But that's a good sort of time where I would say I'd rather use a margin left auto than use some kind of justified content space between, just because it's more reliable, I think. So yeah, that was Google made with Flexbox, and that probably took about half an hour. With using that sort of X elements and the Y elements just as rows and columns, I didn't have to write any other classes. There was no grid system there, no markup, no nothing. That was just X, Y, and that was it for this example, which is pretty powerful to achieve a layout that's completely responsive. The only thing that's been imported was reset. Eric Meyer's reset, yeah. So that's that one. Does anyone have any questions about that, or is that? Yeah.
Can you tell the children to do a different align with parent? So if you set align, like start and those items on the container, can you tell it, can each children be a different one?
Yeah, so that's actually what's happened here. At this bottom one here,
This container, because it's an X, it has flex direction row. You can see there, yeah?
maybe we're going to throw row. Now we got row reverse. It's not going to quite work because of the margins. But we got row here. And it is, by default, flex direction, justify content flex start. If you put it as flex end, but then still put that margin in there, it would still do exactly the same thing, yeah. Because it knows there's some empty space in that container, and it will just use its margin to take up exactly that amount of space as long as no one else is doing it. Any more before we move on? Cool. Now this is sort of stepping back in time a tiny little bit. This was probably the first thing I attempted with Flex. I had this idea where items, when you're working with Flex, size is crazy because you think you can have no size, sometimes you can have a size, and it's sometimes easier just to think, well, what is this item? Is this item a big item, or is it a small item, or is it a medium-sized item? So this was my theory here. I ended up setting a few sizes, medium, large, and extra large, right? And I knew these items would take up as much space as they could. And if they couldn't, they'd wrap onto the next line and take the whole lot. So that's what I've done here. You'll see this item here is a small item. This is a medium item, and this down here is a large item. If it can't fit next to the item that it's told to, it'll break and take up the whole line here.
We can randomize this. It was just used really, I was trying to get a feel for the behaviors you were getting
Out of Flex, and how it handled random content in random sort of arrangement. You can squash this all down and it sort of just knows. They've all been given a width to try and be. So a small one maybe tries to be 320 pixels, a medium one tries to be 420 pixels, another one tries to be 640 pixels, a large one. But if they can't, they just they sort themselves out, and they make best use of the space. A nice little one here is OCD mode. This is what I called OCD mode. This is just that align item stretch. So like I said before, these are rows. So this is that, then that, and that, then that, and items sit side by side. Now I said when things are in rows, they flex in the X, but they stretch in the Y. All right? Flex affects its width. Align item stretch is what affects its height. And remember in that lovely Venn diagram, align items was in the middle, and that's for this exact reason. Because here we can see common problem. Floats did this all the time, and we used to have to use JavaScript to stop this. But we've got unequal heighted columns or items on a row. If we put align item stretch, it appears to have changed the size of the container. It's not really, it's just cleaning things up. It is changing the height, obviously. But we never actually said height equals auto or height equals something. We just said align the items, stretch them to fit on a row. Yeah, that's really all. I think that's the best example in here, is showing stretch really there. Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot more demos there and things that I've gone into, some crazy layouts. This is probably the most complex one, which is, I'll send, or it's private at the moment, but this is the kind of complexity you can get down to. You can't really see full effect, but here you've got a nav across the top with a hero image. Inside that, you've got your typical sort of layout. Now, with a combination of X's or rows and columns, you can start creating things that really flex. This is no media queries at all on the whole of this. This one's probably a better example. When we get to this point, that breaks to go on top. That breaks to go on side, but now these are side by side because they got more space, and eventually they'll break to that. So you can do some pretty crazy stuff with layouts and flex, no media queries. And this again eventually makes your code base a lot simpler, a lot easier to understand, and a lot easier to maintain, which is why I've started using it. But if anybody makes anything with it, I'd love to hear from them. I don't know, hit me up on Twitter or CodePen, I guess. Thanks for listening. Sorry I went on a bit long.